Welcome to Learn With Lowell. I'm Lowell, a serial entrepreneur, startup advisor, and your host for the show. Every week we discover and speak with experts, scientists, leaders, and artists. Today we are joined with Alan Perlstein, who is the CEO of California Cultured, that seeks to remove slavery and unethical practices from chocolate and coffee through the creation of cellular, agriculture-derived versions of those products. It's extremely fascinating. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment to show your support and receive more content like this in the future. Let's stay curious and learn about Alan, California Cultured, their chocolate, and business in this episode of Learn With Lowell Show. To what extent do you think, like the stuff that's happening in Crimea and Russia is motivating the U.S. FDA to be a little bit more open to alternative food sources, since, I think it's like 20 to 30% of world food is now kind of out the window right now, not even talking about like fertilizers and everything else. Like it's going to be pretty bad. Do you think that at all is impacting maybe a quicker change in FDA guidelines with the type of stuff that you're making?
It's affecting, we think, the FDA, the EU, African and Asian regulatory policies quite a bit. The biggest one was in Africa. We're starting to see some of those pressures increase quite a bit. Specifically in Kenya, has just sort of allowed some first and second gen GMO crops to be grown there, since the amount of fertilizer that Kenya usually gets mostly comes from the Ukrainian and Russian regions. So since they're going to have such a lack of supply in the upcoming years, they're trying to allow new seeds and growing methods that would hopefully decrease the needs for the most expensive fertilizers right now that are important to them.
Yeah, and at the same time, it's like, I don't know what Russia was thinking, where it's like, oh, we could do this real quick thing, and then things will snap back. I don't think the world will go back to the way it was, because you go from like a partner that's maybe not stable to like other ways of doing things that are more locally, supply. I think a lot of people are like moving manufacturing to like Mexico and stuff like that. So if it's closer, there's less steps involved. Like that's, from like a business standpoint, that sounds like a better thing to do because it's cost savings. From like a climate standpoint, it sounds like a great thing to do because there's less emissions if you're not like ping ponging all around the board. But yeah, I didn't know about Kenya, but it sounds like GMO, less fertilizer. With like 20-30%, and that's just that's the U.S. imports 20-30% from Russia, Belarus, Russia and Belarus 20-30% just from those two. I was reading about that today. So I think it's smart stuff to be utilizing this technology to make it so that we don't have famines and like kind of go back. The last 50 years, how many people are no longer poor? How many people are no longer hungry as much? And I want that number to go smaller, not bigger, because stuff like this. So hopefully it makes us more versatile over time.
I definitely agree that it's going to make us a lot more resilient, reduce, obviously the CO2 and methane emissions that are constantly skyrocketing, obviously from the amounts of foods and ingredients traveling all over the world. Is being seen as a major driver of pollution, and many countries and corporates are starting to see that it's not good policy to have these really long and delicate supply chains, as these fundamental links are starting to snap, and we think that they're going to be damaged most likely for the next decade to 2 decades, as the world's supply system is most likely going to realign itself.
Yeah, I was reading recently that there's some policy people who think that globalism is about to have a retreat, like a U.S.-led globalism is going to like retreat a little bit, and it's not going to look good. Because I think people take for granted what like the U.S. has done for like making it so that people can trade with whomever they want. Like that's not a normal thing that happens. normally need like a navy. Like even when Britain was a world power, they just made it so that people like the honey only flowed to them. The U.S. just makes it so people can trade with each other. Granted, I'm sure we have trade deals that benefit us because of it, but there is an element of like, can you can trade with other people because of it. I'm curious how that's going to shake out. Do you have thoughts on that? Are you like into like, I'm sure it's like maybe just about food, but I'm curious if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I do. It is going to be a very rapidly changing world over the next 15 years. Obviously for the US supporting global trade on the back of its taxpayers, on the hope that bringing more global trade to some of these more difficult to work with countries such as China and Russia have unfortunately not worked out in the way that it has worked out for many countries in Africa, South America, Europe, India, and other parts of Asia as well. So for all its successes, maybe a couple of noticeable failures, and now that the US has basically seen that what the next steps are, where many countries are trying to have their own internal supply, their own internal fuel, as well as new trading links, and understanding that the US has supported some measures which hurt other measures of US businesses, is not necessarily the track we're on. We need to sort of rebuild many fundamental business sectors, and we honestly see a lot of opportunities in that. How could we have more cleaner mineral supply, more cleaner fertilizer, using more biomanufacturing? That's why I think the Biden administration pushed so much on cell culture meat and the biomanufacturing tactics. Even the US government over the last year and a half also saw this, and they launched a program called Biomade. So where many different core supplies were mined or extracted from all over the world and being sold to United States companies, eventually to consumers. The government has sort of seen we have to start manufacturing a lot of things locally that we used to manufacture, and everything from trade deals with other countries such as Japan and Mexico to more maybe aggressive blocking what's happening now in China and Russia, and a refocus on funding some entrepreneurs and important technologies closer to home seems to be on target of the new global economy or the new global supply chains. So we definitely think it's changing, and it's changing much more rapidly than was predicted. So we definitely agree that it is almost the unshackling of the last century's supply chains, and maybe a new building of some of the ways it used to be, maybe in the 1920s and 30s, but more advanced technology and the know-how and everything else is spread all over the world. So we're very excited about rebuilding these industries in a much, much better way. And I think that's sort of the major theme of why I started my company, as well as my previous companies and the work that I've been doing over the course of my career.
Yeah, and I think to echo one point that you made there in particular is that we made compromises with other countries, and I think it was late to mid '90s. It was after the wall fell, where people started realizing that they could offshore production to places that don't have labor regulation that we had. That you don't have to treat them that way. And that's one of the things that when I was learning about you, it's like completely eliminating the potential for any people enslaved, any people who are indentured servitude in any way like that. I don't think I would like it so that if it was possible, so that none of that could ever touch anything that came into American hands. Because if, or just, obviously none of it in general, but like the idea that we're subsidizing that development in a sense of like, we could be building it locally and then making it so that people can immigrate over and then get 401ks and health insurance and all these different things in America. Instead, they're left in these areas where it's like squalid. They're literally enslaved, and the result is like we satiate our sweet tooth. And it's like, of all the things to make that sacrifice for, to encourage, to allow slavery to continue is pretty heinous. And so I'm really excited to talk about your technology, what you got going on, because if we could just, there was a time where like slavery was like a given, and we've slowly been like, no, it's wrong, no, it's wrong, no, it's wrong, no, it's wrong, and now it's it's wrong, but like, hey, profits, and now it's like maybe we can get to the point where it's just completely eliminated, and it can just be one of those things that we learn about from history, and we try not to go back to. Yeah, I love your technology just from that alone, and raising awareness of the fact that like I don't think people realize that when you're eating chocolate, I don't even know the numbers. Like as a percentage, if I go down the chocolate aisle, how much of that is touched by slavery?
In different ways, it's touched by
Yeah.
slavery. The thing is that the vast majority of chocolate companies and big and small know about these issues. Many of them have been using lots of chocolate that they may be bought in bulk from a supplier, and from that bulk supplier, you have great ethical chocolate, organic chocolate, fair trade chocolate, everything sort of getting mixed together
Mm.
in some of these streams, and it gets really hard to pull it apart.
Mm.
But in essence, the vast majority of the chocolate or bulk chocolate that you find today comes from thousands of farmers in Africa that they're producing everywhere from a couple of 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 tons to giant amounts, and it gets processed and spread all over the world, and it's really hard to tell where it comes from unless you're buying like a single origin bean from a specific farm, unless they specifically say so. But it's really hard to uh, to figure that out unless it specifically says on the label, oh, this came from a farm in maybe Ecuador, or a small farm in Madagascar or something like that, where you could basically see where it comes from, who's doing it. That seems to be the best benefit, but that's also coming at a premium. And many people really can't afford that, or many companies can't afford to sell that chocolate as well. So many companies want to have more sustainable and more ethical sources, but just the systems and the processes that of how chocolate flows and coffee flows to us, it's really sometimes hard to pull it apart, especially if it's coming from Africa or some places from South America and Brazil as well.
What is the what is the unit of measure when we talk about coffee and chocolate? Is it like, X per kilo, is it X per
Yeah.
ton, X per kilogram?
So
Like how do,
yeah. So we basically would be using kilogram
mm,
or ton or kiloton when it comes specifically with chocolate. How we like to maybe talk about for coffee, it's more more like cups, or
hmm,
how many servings of coffee it goes to. Because when it comes with chocolate, because you have everything from couverture, like a very slim coating, unlike unlike a candy bar, or it has dozens of ingredients, to like a solid chocolate bar. But in essence, when it comes with like a cup of coffee, you maybe have a couple grams of ground beans, and
mm.
that's a pretty roughly across the bar. Everyone has a similar amount of beans with some milk and sugar or something else. So that's how we think it gets to be somewhat relatable to people.
Yeah. And so what is, just in terms of inputs to then manufacture to something that a consumer can buy, what is the cost of traditional coffee and then I mean, I'm obviously blended it down because there's like so many different types. But what's the average for traditional, and then like what is the hope for where you think your cost will be?
So I would basically let's start with commodity
Hmm.
products and prices. They are the largest amount of chocolate and coffee currently being produced on the planet. They usually are focused more on price more than anything else. It's more like a whole bunch of low quality to rotten to raw to a whole bunch of beans basically enter these systems. So that's the commodity system. It ranges right now on the bottom from $2 to $4, depending on the time of year and the process. But that's sort of where the bulk of products usually are. That's where you would find coatings, flavors, and thousands of different places that you would encounter coffee and chocolate every single day. And that's what's being traded on the large exchanges globally. And that is where most of the deforestation and and the major ethical slavery and pollution problems are happening more than the higher priced versions.
Hmm. Then yours would be like comparable, or is it? Do you expect it to be cheaper? Or like, how's that? I mean, I don't think you're at
Yeah,
the point to really know at scale, but
no.
just like, what do you expect it to be?
So we're basically looking to launch our products close to sort of premium in the beginning,
Hmm.
as well during the time where we could refine our process, refine our technology, and to make sure we don't lose money on the beginning
Yeah.
processes that we put in. But we see a path, and our big vision is to disincentivize slavery. So our ultimate path is to eventually displace some large amounts of these commodity products over time. Our first vision is to start within some premium products, some unique products that would be impossible for people to taste or experience in the first place. And that's sort of what we're able to do today. Uh, but as we lower the cost of producing this, have better data, have more, we would say, more mainstream traditional flavors, where the flavor of chocolate and coffee are basically similar across our lines, then that would be the time that we can sell it for closer to what all consumers can eventually afford. And that's basically where we see ourselves moving over time.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Is it? Do those numbers are they like the aggregate numbers? So they include shipping costs to get like the 2 to 4. Does that include shipping costs, or is that like in addition to shipping costs?
Uh, that would usually be for shipping costs, and a lot of this is subsidized in different ways
Yeah.
from different countries, from different groups. Lots of these prices were negotiated well in advance, uh, and many people, as you can imagine, lose huge amounts of money if they didn't time fertilizer prices, oil prices, shipping prices, lost prices correctly. And a lot of people make massive fortunes and lose massive fortunes, uh, basically betting on what the future of chocolate, coffee, and all these other commodities will be like, since it takes such a long time right now to go from bean to finished bean through all the ports and many different hands to port to go to the industrial chocolate grinders in the Americas and Europe as well. So there's a very long, complex, and difficult to predict supply chain.
Yeah, I imagine they're gonna love you for that because like it's a little bit more stable. I don't know for inputs. I don't think there's what would you need? I believe you're going to build in America or grow in America. So then, is there anything that America doesn't produce that you would need to make your product? So it's all kind of
Uh,
like locally sourced in some ways.
Everything we're
Yeah.
focusing on on a couple of different carbon sources. We think the future, you have to have some aspects of flexibility of where you could source some of these things from. If you lock yourself into potentially one carbon source and the price of the carbon source shoots through the roof, you're shooting yourself in the foot. So we're
Yeah.
trying to build in some redundancy of where we could get these sources. So it's primarily a sugar. It could come from corn. It could come from beet. It could come from traditional cane. It could come from starch as well. So there are some places where we can source our carbon. There's other places where we also use plant hormones, and basically plant hormones are found in today's food supply. You can find them in everything from coconut, tomato, rice, potato, and other very large industrial food groups that are being grown as well. So we can basically utilize different versions of carbon and these different plant hormones or plant instructions to feed ourselves.
If it's beet, corn, starch, like a potato, I imagine, or something, does it at all affect the end result of flavor, or does the process of turn it into something that you can use basically de-tastify it, texturify or
there
whatever would be the
there are
word?
different steps and different processes of how the cell lines get made, and sort of understanding of how to pre-process some of this carbon that that basically makes them happy. We're overall, you could sort of change the diet of some of these things over time, and you could play around with some of these variables, but in essence, we're trying to both make sure that the growth kinetics can reach their maximum, so that means we're not losing money while growing them, making sure that the flavors and these bioactive compounds, it's sort of complex when it comes with flavor, because you have
Yeah.
these organelles in the cell that make these compounds that basically could be from everything from defense to building out some internal mechanism. But when we apply different microbes, roasting or grinding steps, these proteins and complex flavors sort of evolve into the flavors we know and love. For instance, there's a transport protein, once it gets broken down in cocoa, that releases many of the characteristic cocoa notes that we know and love. So by tracking that throughout the entire process, we could understand if the cells like it or not, and if we could hit our right flavors or not.
Is there? I recently had someone from Ginkgo Bioworks on, so I'm now like kind of I in my head I kind of compare similar processes. Do you have any intentionality in building kind of like a brain bank, like a data bank for like what works, what doesn't work, and then you can do like analysis off it to like make that like an entrenched piece of your IP where no one else could replicate that? Like you're learning from what you do.
Yeah, the platform model is something that we're focusing on quite a bit. We basically see the technology that we're using for cocoa and coffee are almost interchangeable in many different parts, but we could
Mhm.
see it being used for other valuable plant tissues, fats, bioactives that we know and love, but are very difficult to produce and source. We basically believe that this technology has uh, a a very large potential of what it could recreate, from fabrics to materials to cosmetics to pharmaceuticals to furniture, and art supplies. It, it it's it's unlimited. We think the applications of what you could grow with this. So we think it's pretty important to capture this data of understanding, as you said, what works, what doesn't work, what lessons can we take, since we don't want to repeat things if we know it doesn't work. And that's in essence what we're trying to do. Run as many small experiments as possible. With this type of recipe, it tends to grow a little bit better. Let's write it down versus we find something weird happening downstream that we didn't expect. So trying to learn these lessons and capturing them is the only way for us to scale successfully as a company and potentially apply the lessons we're learning in chocolate and coffee for other species potentially as well.
Okay, so I think hopefully other people have been listening so far. Like this is like not their first time, but at the same time, maybe you don't know anything about culture. So roughly, what happens is there's like a substrate, there's an environment, there is a material. I'm trying to think like how would I say this so I can like have you like basically say, hey, this is how we're different. So there's a substrate, there's an environment, be it petri dish or like a bio foundry, like a
reactor,
kind of looks like
bioreactor or a tank.
Thank you, thank you. Because my tongue was getting stuck, and then there's like some type of like a growth accelerant, usually for like human, for not human cells, for animal protein. It's bovine serum. What does that look like for yours? Because not only do you have a substrate, not only do you have an environment, not only do you like it kind of mirrors that, but you also are able to have like something that's bean like enough where you can roast it at the end. So it's not just like with plant with animal protein, it's like they try to replicate the texture, but it doesn't. It's like how close can you replicate it versus it's the same thing. Where like if you're able to roast it and have like the same type of flavor profiles of coffee, I feel like that's more of a 1-to-1 in my mind. Maybe like some chemists out there's like, no, Lowell, the chemicals are the same. But like how is yours different? Like how does it just like in the stages compare to normal cell agriculture? And at the same time, if I said something wrong, please correct, because there's people who maybe this is the first time.
No, I think you've definitely got the gist of it. There is basically food where the cells live. It's basically the food and the environment and the ways of how you selected the cell. So it's the potential from the cell once they've eaten enough food and they're happy or stressed enough in the environment. And that's sort of this weird thing. There are certain times you want the cells to be happy, and there's very certain times that you want the cells to be really unhappy. So when the cells are unhappy, they can produce really interesting things. But when they're happy, they tend to grow and divide as well. So you want them to grow and divide by making them really happy. And then at a certain time, you want to make them really unhappy as well. So it's this, it's a similar process for both cell cultured meat, fermentation technology, and even our process as well.
Do you, for the cells, and if you can't like get this deal, this is fine. But the cells that you take is from the plant or like the seed itself, and you're replicating the seed that then goes through this process, if that makes sense. Like,
so it depends of what you want to make, and in essence of how long you want it, it's going to take, and as well, there's some deeper questions as well. But in essence, you could take a cutting from any part of a plant, and with enough time and effort, you're able to turn that or descendants of that tissue into any other part of a plant, from bean to leaf to stalk to stem to root, anything, over time, over enough generations. There are some there is some questions also about that. It's sort of honestly saying, is it really a bean if you're taking from a leaf, or you're taking from a root, or you're taking from here? Or also there's a question, is how long does it actually take to get into your material of question. What's also the genetic drift? Because sometimes if you're getting like a leaf to turn into a bean, you're still having some leaf genes
Mm,
semi-activated. So you have to figure out how to knock them down
that's
or
interesting.
cut them out. Uh, but the tissue has a propensity sometimes to want to turn them back on again. So uh, usually the closer you are, maybe to where you're what you want to go is better. But some people are saying it doesn't matter. So it's this weird almost philosophy and other aspects of science that are still being discussed and still trying to be figured out.
Where do you guys have like a small like cocoa plant or a coffee plant like to grow the things, or do you just source like the DNA, the cuttings from a person?
We do both.
Mm,
So we think it's very important to have always a supply of our plants we're growing. It's once you sort of take out all the plants, it's sort of you forget also where you come from, and
yeah.
it's always great to sort of see that transition. They could go from one single plant, one single bean into literally a river of chocolate. And understanding that process is also wild. But we like to have some of our original cuttings, plants still there, just as a place to sort of unwind. You always want sometimes to go to a room with lots of plants, lots of things growing, just to brighten your mood. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, that's sort of going to be our plant room in our new headquarters that we're planning to move into before the end of the year.
Uh, do you have to take new cuttings of the original plant, or do you take cuttings of cuttings of cuttings, kind of like copies of copies of copies?
That's basically what we could do. We could go multiple ways. We could go everything from tissue or cuttings of cuttings. In essence, when you're basically going through cell selection, it is basically cuttings through cuttings. It's,
Hmm.
oh, you take a cell, you put it on a plate, you have all these maybe different parts of the cell, then you chop them up, separate them, different conditions, and that is sort of an ongoing process. So we are trying to make this ultimate uh, cell that does everything we want it to eventually do. And for instance, maybe speaking on the broader or even the larger world as how it relates to that, almost all coffee grown in like all of South America, there's like mythology that all of it came from a single plant that was smuggled out of France to Martinique from the king's royal garden by one of his mistresses to this French officer, and that's how lots of coffee got to the Americas. And from there, it got stolen and then shifted and then stolen again and shifted, and that was sort of the trend of coffee for quite a bit, and also from chocolate, it's sort of the opposite. So it comes from Mexico, South America originally, uh, and started to get mass produced in Africa from some stolen beans. It was sort of a secret about that,
Hmm.
similar to how coffee beans were first traded and also kept highly prized for basically hundreds of years before they were going to be grown in other places.
I think chocolate also was like I think it was reserved for royalty and it was like very bitter. Like it wasn't like the chocolate today. They're quite
Yeah.
spoiled in terms of the sweetness of what we get today. Back then it was
Oh,
like yeah,
yeah.
weird.
In the beginnings of chocolate and coffee for hundreds of years, it was basically just taken out of the fruit, smushed up in one of the versions of a mortar and pestle or molcajete if you want from Mexico, or different instruments to mash it up, add some water or sometimes hot liquid, and that's basically what it was for both coffee and chocolate. It took lots of oxidants processes for understanding what to ferment it, to grind it, to roast it, to add in milk, to add in sugar, add in the right types of how to filter it or not. There's basically maybe every 100 years there was an additional evolution of chocolate and coffee from what it was to what it is today, and literally even for hundreds of years. Just for instance, coffee, most of it was never really drunk from the taste. I think almost to the 1800s, it was usually pretty bad tasting.
Yeah, most coffee now I still think is kind of like Starbucks coffee isn't exactly the best coffee. I don't know. So I look forward to something like what you guys can do, being out there, which can be such a better quality, so people can actually enjoy. I hear this a lot, like fast food coffee doesn't taste like anything compared to actually good coffee. Um,
No,
I have not tasted. Yeah, I have not A and B tested this to know the difference, but I'm told that like the qualitative, like you can, there's a qualitative difference between the two.
there is. It has to do with the cleanliness of it. It's the
Mm,
mouthfeel. It's some of the oils and compounds are really desirable. Yeah, and when it comes also to fast food coffee, it's the goal is to be cheap and to basically taste good. So milk, sugar, you get your caffeine hit and out the door. And that's usually what it was for quite a while. And most people just drank coffee for just the great drugs it has inside of it. And um, what is it? Michael Pollan likes to say that caffeine was, one of the most important drugs for the building of Western civilization, of what
mhm.
what built our world. And a lot of people don't really care for the taste; they just want that functionality, and it's still a very important part for many people's lives to get that hit of being awake. And the quality is never is probably not going to be the focus. I think it's going to be price, it's going to be taste, and maybe even carbon or ethical source processes later. And eventually, we see there might be a lot more interesting varietals coming out later. Like I think when it comes with fast food coffee, there's like some very large players in the field that are known for making like their coffee to go, and they have lots of fans. But in essence, it's a simple flavor that they have lots of big fans by, and they found out they can make it relatively inexpensive and make a ton of it. But we think eventually consumers are starting to look for more ethical and better, higher quality coffee and ingredients, and they're willing to pay for it with sort of the springing of third and fourth gen coffee purveyors and newer obsessiveness with coffee and its flavor.
Is it possible to hybridize coffee and chocolate to make like choco coffee?
Uh, Maybe we've seen some hybrids of coffee trees where people could sort of meld them together, but they're very different species as
Mm.
well. We haven't really seen any information upon that. But at the end of the day, we have to remember coffee being it grows also as a fruit, and it also grows at different times of the year, and it ripens at different times of the year. And chocolate also could ripen and grow at different times of the year. So instead of necessarily harvesting everything from a tree or plant, you have to like one day something you might have like one fruit or two pods. The next day you might have 20, or you might have one or none. So there's all this. You basically have to check it every single day to harvest it. So there's a lot of issues on its productivity as a plant that makes it really hard to mass produce, and it still requires an incredibly large amount of labor to grow high quality coffee and chocolate. Lots of the lower quality coffees are basically machine harvested in large industrial sections and usually sprayed with pesticides, fungicides, and there's a lot of clear cutting to make it viable. And that's in essence what's out there. I don't know about these trees. Very different to pollinate, very different to grow, slightly different growing conditions, but they grow in a similar area. There are many farms in Africa and South America that both grow coffee and chocolate side by side, and they could use some benefits. It's actually beneficial to grow both of them together as sort of an agricultural process. But eventually, what we're looking to do is maybe have more chocolatey flavored coffee and more, or even super caffeinated chocolate, or also completely decaffeinated chocolate as well. So there's more deeper thoughts that we have in terms of flavor or functionality as a product, where we could actually play around with those capabilities, which would be very difficult to almost impossible to grow these crops.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of really undervalued benefits to using cellular agriculture or related techniques, because there's no growing season anymore. You can grow it 24/7. I mean, granted, there's people and stuff that have to work it, but you can grow it all year round. You don't have to grow it around the equator anymore, so you could grow it up in Antarctica if you wanted, which would probably be really nice to the Antarctican people. And
Well,
if there's disease and stuff, no?
I just want to jump in there, like when you mentioned Antarctic, but I think it's the Finns, and Finland is the highest per capita consumer of coffee, and like and you're right, because of their living so north, they only have an amazing summer where the sun sets at midnight, but in the winter, they barely have any light most of the year. So they really need their coffee. And if you could grow it basically locally, domestically, in these areas, using more local feedstocks, we think it could be a pretty interesting and compelling story that they don't have to ship it from around the world, and they can make the varietals that speak best to the local populations, that work better for specific flavors or berries or moods, or even bioactive properties that might be desirable for specific populations as well.
Yeah, I think you also can like see it happening too. I was also wondering if like how far I keep using like this turtle metaphor when I ask questions, and I don't like, someone needs to write in and tell me to stop if they hate it. So if the turtle is chocolate or coffee and you're making it in your factory, how many turtles underneath that turtle and above that turtle could you stack? Well, I guess not above it, but below it, in terms of like, could you also make cellular agriculture like carbon things? So like you had like just like a closed circle factory where on one end you had like a cellular agriculture equivalent of like starch being made, and then it gets fed into your system, and then it gets like it outputs with a completely sustainable thing. Is that like how far down could you go with turtles, I guess, using that as a metaphor?
There is a question on the viability of that. that is something I would love to build and to test, but that in itself is going to require quite a bit of time to really figure out.
Yeah.
We think, but it's possible. There is really nothing in science that we've seen that says, oh, you can't necessarily make it that way. Um, we think, for instance, between carbon and hydrogen, you could go pretty far by sucking up CO2, but there might be some other compounds, for instance, phosphorus, nitrogen, actually more of the elements, NPKs that
Hmm.
we would have to source and find. There might be some areas from that where we can basically grow or harvest from the air, but there needs to be quite a bit of some of these missing elements to also grow the tissue. So that might be maybe the limiting factor, like phosphorus, potassium type inputs might be important, but we don't know since we haven't really seen that many papers describe anything as a closed loop system.
Hmm.
Even maybe the most simplistic systems today, which are trying to use CO2 to convert to convert air into protein and other products, you still need some inputs. So it's going to be a similar issue and problem that many companies are looking to figure out. So can you pull in these things from air? Can you have organisms generate it, or do you actually literally still have to mine it? These are some questions we are thinking about, and we're also looking as an interest in the field of who's looking to push that technology forward. We think that might be a great thing from either NASA or university type spinouts could do, or if there's any interesting company that has quite a bit of extra capital to invest. We think in this. It may be a technology stack that gets you as close as possible to something that's replicating a replicator. I would assume that, and that's sort of that concept. Was it like called a protein synthesizer? Or yeah.
Mm. Star Trek, right? Just to make sure we're talking about
Yep.
the right thing.
Yep.
There's a
We're yeah.
yeah.
We
There's a
we don't have
Stargate replicator as well, but it's
yeah.
evil.
Yeah, different replicators for different things, but in essence it's trying to strip the fundamental units of atoms into building new things, and we're very far away from that. The only thing we could do is maybe have tissues grow in the right way and keep them
Mm.
stored. You could have some basic building blocks there and put them together, but we see the ability to grow these tissues, compounds, and flavors as something that's been maybe on the edge of science fiction for a very long time. And many of these other technologies basically put the Jenga bricks all together, where first it looked like a big piece of cheese of so many missing parts, but now, in 2023, okay, we know the reactors, we see some validation, we see consumer acceptance, we see regulatory traction, we see every single government is already putting on rules for cell culture meat fermentation. We see global giant movements of, as we talked about earlier, of globalization versus local production, rapid focus on grabbing some fertilizer stocks and commodities as well, which is also happening, and seeing maybe the desire to not have incredibly complex supply chains sort of rapidly fall on people's head, and
Hmm.
understanding how countries are going to trade and work with each other in the future, and putting that all together is sort of our own unique cocktail of how we see ourselves growing this and understanding what technologies that we could build in the future as well.
Yeah, America has such a history with agriculture. Before we were even like a big country, we were such a exporter of agriculture goods, and we used it to like get favorable deals and stuff like that. Usually, when you're having an excess that you can trade to other people, things come your way that you enjoy. So I think it's something that people don't either know about or they don't talk about all that much. Is that like I think for every one farmer in the United States, like they feed like 150 to 200 people around the world. So like we feed everyone here. Well, we have the capacity to feed everyone here. Everyone doesn't get fed because money stuff. But then we still have like the capacity to like go out and like feed all these other different people. So I'm very excited for more technology like this coming here, and increasing that number to the point where it's like for every one person working in agriculture, and I maybe we can feed like 1,000 people or 10,000 people, and like we get to the point where like everyone on the planet
It,
has all the nutrient stuff that they need.
we agree, and we definitely see the advancements of efficiency that really allowed America to be a global exporter and powerhouse are still there. But we're basically focusing on the next steps of efficiencies. Can you make
Yeah,
it even better? Can you not necessarily need to exploit people or
yeah,
animals or land to get these economic or efficiency gains? You know, it's a lot more efficient to have giant feedlots or giant industrialization. But then you're thinking about, okay, that means you have then huge amounts of land get deforested, huge amounts of waste, huge streams, and huge amounts of pollution get generated. They all don't get distributed or reabsorbed by the environment as easily as they can, but the process in its entirety becomes more efficient. And that was sort of the push of industry for quite a while. And hopefully with the push from consumers, the push from NGOs and many governments are saying, okay, how could we be efficient, but also have better processes in place that we could actually use the land after, that we don't have to burn these things because it's so the pollution is just so immense, or some of these bigger issues which are happening. And maybe speaking about efficiency, I don't know if you've seen about the large pig buildings that were being
in China,
constructed. Yeah, so they were
disturbing.
focusing on, yeah, that it is pretty disturbing, and they were focused on the efficiency, and it could potentially be pretty efficient since you're having everything in one building. But then again, you are looking at it as the amount of pollution coming out of it is quite a lot. The amount of just like suffering that many animals would never ever see light or smell air or anything is also disturbing. And also the process of how they're basically what type of lives they have is also difficult. So can you actually compress the efficiency or make it more efficient, but without these horrible and destructive practices? But then again, the reason they built out these facilities, why, is because they were worried about pig flu and these other things that I think devastated almost global porcine production in the last couple of years, where many countries had to kill tens of millions of pigs because there was an outbreak of swine flu, and now we also had an outbreak of bird flu, and that's why we also now have a massive egg shortage. So
Hmm.
we see these things happening more and more often, where the disease outbreaks are going to occur in pigs, in chickens, in cows, and many other animals that people eat. There are companies that are looking to be a lot more efficient of that, but we think eventually the ultimate efficiency at scale, and once these technologies will be at full production, will be cell culture.
Yeah, I think that we've started to reach the peak in terms of what we can do with traditional farming. And and I think a byproduct of that, like you're saying, is the increase in the decrease in quality and the increase in virulent diseases coming out because they're so packed together. It's like you're just asking for it. If like all day long we were a foot away from each other and just kept coughing in each other's mouths, eventually we're gonna get a disease from this. Like that just makes sense.
Exactly.
So I think this type of technology, and I look forward to like the ranchers and all these people who are in agriculture being a part of the trend to change it because every farmer I know cares about their animals that they raise. So if they can go from not needing to have like 10,000 animals to just like 100, they could spend a lot of time and energy into really give them the best care they can. They're going to make that trade, and they're going to be a part of making it so that they set up a microbrewery in their local community and stuff like that because they care about their animals. They don't want this type of stuff. They hate that type of stuff. I don't know a farmer that if they saw another farmer like beat an animal wouldn't like get in their face about it. Like they hate that stuff. So
Yeah.
it's a component that I don't think I hear too many farmers talking about. Maybe they're just like too like the suicide rates for farmers is pretty extreme. Like they're very stressed out people. They're like veterans and doctors in that way. So I look forward to seeing them kind of like come up as they see how it's not like displacing them, but it's like working together to make it better for the animals, better for them, and better for everyone else at the same time.
At the end of the day, people don't want giant, empty, low value things being made. Many people want a concentration of land, of people, of processes, usually
Yeah.
under one roof or one way of doing it. But we basically see in our vision of it, in our vision is going to be farmers are going to be producing from animals, but they're going to have much higher quality
Yeah.
and sell for much higher value, and the crops that they could produce be used in different industrial systems as well. We think, as you said, of local agriculture, local food, and to supply these systems is something that we think is going to be inevitable going forward.
So and I don't know, I like we don't have to the extent we have the math on this. I'm curious. Maybe just like you can give me like a guess, but how many acres do you need of coffee or the chocolate type plants to produce like X type of result, and then like what type of factory do you need to make the equivalent amount? And I'm sure like you're working with that with your new HQ and like building this out, but I'm curious like what would one expect the exchange to look like as we make the transition? For every 1 acre, it's like 10 feet of square. I don't know. Like, I'm making up numbers now, but what would that look like?
Yeah, so we are still trying to
Mm,
calculate the specific acres because it sort of differs different places you go to, and different countries and different technologies. For instance, in the Ivory Coast, in some places it could be really high, in other places super low. So we see a wide variety of acres, but one of the numbers that we basically think that we could basically uh, uh, talk about, discuss, whereas a a facility that's approximately 100,000 square feet can can basically uh, 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 produce the equivalent of a percent of the world's total supply. So
yeah.
roughly within those characteristics and that footprint, you can have a very large amount of products being produced.
Where I think you said you have a new HQ, but is that also having a production facility there, or are you looking to build one of those somewhere else?
Yeah, so we are in the process of building out our HQ and pilot plant in
Mm,
West Sacramento today. So we were very focused on making sure that we could be close to a major food hub, which Sacramento is. It has a lot of ports, travel, shipping, trains, and lots of food basically flows through West Sacramento. There also tends to be quite a number of people within the industry around us as well. And we also have people that are knowledgeable about not only coffee and chocolate, but figuring out how to scale up. So we see that we're in the right location, and we think within our current facilities that we're building out, we can produce a significant amount of prototypes, technology, and processes that would eventually be going into our demonstration plants, which we can eventually produce a significant amount of chocolate and coffee from. So it's going to be important to build out our current factory to eventually to get to that larger factory in the next couple of years.
Is there, and if this is like a secret thing that you guys want to keep to yourselves, you don't have to answer, but what are the chances, just in statistics, that there's going to be just like a pipe with chocolate running through somewhere in the facility, kind of like Willy Wonka? Is there any, like, is it greater than zero is basically my question.
It's 100%. You're going, that's going to be we call it our chocolate river pipe, but in essence, when we're talking about efficiencies, and we basically have that chocolate pipe, many companies are very interested because of what that could basically mean, where you don't need thousands of boats and cars and vehicles transporting it from all over. You don't have the massive amounts of pollution, where you could grow it locally, sustainably, is sort of this vision of the world of what we want to build, where the things we love don't have to be made by a little kid in the middle of the jungle to make us happy, and for a price that we think is a steal. So that's sort of maybe that big future vision of what food is. We can make, and if we could achieve that vision and significantly reduce the deforestation and the slavery that comes out of the current processes, we could think our mission would be accomplished.
Yeah, I would agree. That'd be a great vision achieved. So far, I keep thinking, like, what are the downsides? What are the downsides? What are the downsides? With animal cell ag, there's like, oh, I guess you have to like harm an animal, but like no, nothing seems to be harmed with this type of system that we're talking about. Like, there doesn't really seem to be a downside. There's no, I haven't heard anything about pollutions they have to be concerned about. There's like inputs, so it's just like making sure those things are sourced appropriately and that they're coming in the right quality. Are there downsides here that you're seeing, or like technical hurdles? I think those might be two separate things. Like, a downside isn't a technical hurdle per se, but are there downsides here that people just don't normally think about? Because so far it just seems like this is pretty good. This makes sense. We should be doing this. Like, there's nothing like it creates plutonium and it like pollutes the environment or something. Like, there's nothing like that.
So the main reason, I guess, if you jump back in history, you can understand why things happened and why things didn't happen. Like, for instance, like, why are Americans more coffee drinkers than tea drinkers? Obviously, because we from the revolution. But why is England more tea drinkers than coffee drinkers mostly? And that's another question. Oh, because the West, some of these giant corporations, the West Indies Trading Company had a monopoly on tea, and it was much simpler to grow than coffee. And they owned all the shipping lines and and it was much easier to make. Just put some water in, and royalty loved tea. So make sure that you say, oh, royalty drinks it, make it dirt cheap, super easy, better tasting, and all these factors come into play of why something happens. So maybe jumping into thinking about downsides of this plant cell culture technology. In the 1990s, there was this big put. There was maybe the big push of biomanufacturing. They had some big wins within Genentech, what made insulin in the early 80s. There were different biotech companies trying to use this for food, for ingredients. And the first food or food processing aid was rennet, which came
Mm.
from cows. And they were thinking for a while, what organism should we use? And it just so happened that they had E. coli. So, all right, we have it. It's closest to market. We know what we're doing. So let's just go and use it. At the same time, plant cell culture also started to come on the scene, but the amount of, I would say, scientific work on it mostly came from the tobacco industry, whereas the work on E. coli and maybe yeast came from the pharmaceutical and some other industries. So I would basically think there was a lot more money first on these microbes, first to get them to scale up, and they sort of won the de facto scaling war, which was based on knowledge, which was based on momentum, and based on price. But
Mhm.
now there's 30 years of advancements of all these new tools and knowledges and processes in place. So we think there's a lot more knowledge on plant systems today. We see how clean they are. We see now even the downsides, for instance, of microbial fermentation. There's a lot of waste. There's a lot of excess products that have to be disposed of properly. And there's a lot of downstream work as well to separate your product of interest from the rest of the biomass altogether. So as time went on, there were more and more benefits being seen for plant cell culture. But in essence, it just no one has really scaled this up in the levels needed to show that there isn't any considerable downsides. There's maybe been a handful of examples in the world, but they were basically also using some similar process where you only could get one single compound from a cell, and they also had to waste a lot. With our technology, we can basically use 99.9% of all the mass we come out with. All of our media that goes into our system is all food safe. So that's another downstream benefit that we could use it for multiple different purposes as well. So we have a pretty circular path, and we honestly see at the end of the day, it's one of the best processes we think to manufacture many foods and materials in the future as well. Since it's going to be plant tissue, it's pretty robust. Consumers are more accepting of it because people grow plants everywhere, and they're used to cutting little pieces of plant and dividing and growing a million different versions of it. People cook with it every day. So we're all used to manipulating plants in different aspects, and they have all these amazing properties that we're still learning and trying to sort of control. But what we see, what we're doing is the next step of agriculture. It has to be a lot more efficient. It has to be a lot more local, and we have to understand how to eliminate all these other downsides, like the efficiency of growing things is really bad, and how could you improve it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's almost like a re-domestication of plants. Like, it almost
Yep.
feels like that. There's like one layer that we've done, we've got it down, well to the point where it's like the starting to have problems, and now you're coming in, and there's new domestication on the molecular level, on the cellular level. It's an exciting time. It's like if nothing bad happens, like we don't get hit by a meteor or something in the next like 40 years, like I feel like we're gonna have a really robust system, and it might be a really great time to be alive. Even with like all this stuff happening in like China and Russia and stuff, hopefully like no one nukes anyone. But but it sounds like it might be a really cool couple of decades. Are there
It will be.
are there any books you recommend people check out? It doesn't have to be cellular agriculture related, but anything you're reading that either currently or that you've gifted to anyone that you recommend?
Well, if you want to talk about redistribution of globalization and oil and resources, I like Peter Zion had a
Yeah,
new book. The
yeah,
end is
I'm
just
reading
the
that
beginning.
guy.
Oh,
Yes,
perfect. Yeah, yeah.
that's the guy I was referring to. Yes,
Yeah,
he's great.
yeah, yeah. Um, uh, great guy. Have been trying to combine aspects of agriculture, engineering, supply chains all together. I'm also let's see, Noah Harari. Obviously, understanding, the evolution of humans and technology, understanding the role of how caffeine of how sort of caffeine played in world history was
Hmm.
sort of
It's
also
fascinating.
was understanding for most of human history, just people were too drunk or stoned or semi blitzed
Dysentery.
to really, yeah, to really concentrate or tackle big
Yeah.
problems. Evidently, it's when we have caffeine in our circulating in our bloodstream is when we could evidently tackle complex and difficult problems. So it seemed it motivates us more, and we just need to grow tons of caffeine and chocolate and coffee to solve the next 1,000 years of problems. If I bet you anything, for us to solve, from infinite energy to infinite food to pollution and homelessness and colonization, is all going to start from someone drinking their morning cup of coffee, or feeling good after their experiment didn't work with their chocolate bar. And we think maybe these two things are going to help a lot of people through their ups and downs of building the next phase of humanity. And that's how I like to think about it.
Yeah. It could literally be a chocolate bar. They have like a little biomanufacturer thing and they can make their own chocolate. Um, you have a newsletter. Are there other good ways to stay up to date with what's going on?
Oh, we are on LinkedIn, on
Hmm.
Twitter, on Instagram, and TikTok. So we like to put out some like cool videos of some science and some chocolate making. We like to sort of tell sort of the story of like what's happening in the world, and how chocolate and coffee can be so much better compared to what they are today. So we want to like sort of let people in our journey, and showing what does it actually take to rebuild a whole industry. So we'll love if you could subscribe, follow, and be in touch.
Yeah, definitely. And everyone, don't worry if you didn't catch that. The stuff's in the show notes. It will be there. And so, since it's a learn with Lowell, I always like to. I'm always curious what people are learning about. Like, what are you currently in a state of like? I don't know about it. You can kind of see that like that hill of ignorance, and you're like scaling it right now. What's that hill you're going through right now?
That would be I really got into this interesting tech tool called the Flipper Zero, if you've ever heard of it. So it's security testing. So
Mm,
it's this little tool that some engineers put together based upon something that came out a couple of years ago called a Ornagachi, where people hacked a Tamagotchi from the
mm,
90s to use it as a hacking tool. But I
mm,
sort of loved the ability to sort of understand what's around you, because you have so many different signals and noises, uh, and and different things all around you all this time, and you never really know what's around there. And this little like handheld device allows you to probe into subnetwork things, what's open, what's closed, who uh, and sort of playing around with it to understand of 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 things we see and things we don't see. and I've sort of became a little fascinated about pin testing. Yeah. So
Hmm.
that's what I'm sort of diving down the crazy rabbit hole in right now.
Sweet. And then no, actually, that's all my questions. So I'll just end well, I guess I could ask this: is there anything? And I can just delete this off. There's nothing. Was there anything that you wanted to talk about that we didn't get covered? I feel like we jumped into a lot of things, but sometimes I don't get into everything that's like you hope to discuss.
Ooh, I think we covered quite a bit.
Yeah.
Obviously, it tastes good. By the way, did you happen to get any chocolate yet?
No, I
Okay,
didn't know that was an option.
that is an option. Would you be okay tasting it and giving like your own feedback as well
Sure,
on the
as long as it doesn't
podcast?
kill
Yeah.
me. Yes,
No,
as
it
long-
doesn't. No, we just demonstrate our chocolate for 250 investors in Zurich. So well, we got pretty good feedback. So love to share, and
Mhm.
if you're open to try and giving some feedback,
Do,
we'd appreciate that.
do you are you also looking for like the public, like a sign up, like, hey, do you guys want to be a part of like a beta testing, or do you have
Oh
something like
yeah,
that going on?
we're getting ready for actually a demo kit, so we could
Hmm.
actually send out different types of chocolate that we're making, and getting people to judge them and give us some feedback of what people like, what people don't want, or even crazy suggestions as well. Yeah.
Where would people go to sign up for that, and how many people are you looking for?
The instructions most likely will be on our
Hmm.
website, caculture.com, within the next 2 to 3 months for that. And we will have all the information on our website.
Thank you for joining us today with the Learn with Lowell show. Check us out at learnwithlowell.com. Anywhere podcasts can be found, subscribe. Tell me what you thought of this episode. Check us out on YouTube in particular. It's a new thing I'm doing. Timestamps and links are in the show notes. Thank you for coming, and I hope every one of you found something today that you're curious about to learn more about, and you'll go out and be curious and learn something new. Thank you, and have a great rest of your day.